Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good day, good wherever you are. It's wonderful to have you here with us again, joining us for the Impossible Summit Day. Before I get into the details of what the day looks like, I just wanted to give a big thank you to everyone who showed up yesterday, as well as all of you who may be new for today. Thank you for taking the time to make the time to join us today. I also want to give a big shout out to all of the people who've written me privately, asking me about the event, sending beautiful messages of how grateful they are that we did something like this. It really has been so touching to hear from strangers, to hear from friends and family about how important this event has been to them. And, bringing you in our heart is, it just feels so good. And this is a really important event. We wanted to bring about connection in our world that feels so disconnected at this time. And I just really appreciate how much you can feel that. So thank you everybody who sent messages, who's wanted to be a part, who stepped in and asked if we needed help and volunteer. I mean, it's just been such an incredible experience launching this Impossible Summit. I also want to give thanks to my team. We, the people behind this technology, behind the Impossible Summit, we call ourselves the New World Network. And we decided to call ourselves the New World Network because we're creating a new world and we're building the network. The intention behind all of this was to really call all of us change agents, people who are choosing to take responsibility for shaping the kind of world we want to live in, and actually create a network between us so that we could weave our threads together and not do things separately. And so that we could actually initiate a new paradigm of actually supporting one another as opposed to competing against one another. Even if we don't mean to do that, the world that we have been living in has created that sort of competition, that gap between us, competing for promotion, competing for funding, competing for this, competing for that. And we decided no more, no more of this. If we're going to create the future we want to live in, we got to do it together. And the blessing of the COVID, as we heard yesterday from Julia, as well as from Kuyuk, this is a moment where we're all touched by something that doesn't discriminate. It affects all of us, and we're all in this together. Climate change doesn't discriminate. We're all in this together. And so, in many ways, this is an opportunity to leverage this moment of crisis, to step in, to reach out, and to grasp hands and hearts and say, you know what? We're going to do something different. Instead of fighting for change, we're going to model change. We're going to model change by working together and by supporting one another more. And so the Impossible Summit is part of that first launch of creating that vision of this network that we hope all of you will be a part of and continue to help us grow. This is one of many projects that we want to do to bring our communities together and to really create that sort of support that we all need to bring our initiatives more visible and alive and to reach more people in the world. So thank you for joining us and being here at this time to create the change that we want to really become. So in that, I wanted to just also bring about a couple of beautiful things that were said yesterday that are on my heart and on my mind this morning as we begin to set the stage for day 2, which is going to be phenomenal because we're going to be talking about impossible journeys and going from crisis to opportunity, which in my opinion, that is what is up. Because right now we're in crisis, but we're going to move it into opportunity. So I'm very excited about our panel that will be led by Adam Bello today. But before we do that, I have a special gift for you and wanted to just bring in the spirits of the panel yesterday. I woke up this morning and I had all this gratitude in my heart. And I was thinking about some of the things that the panelists had said yesterday, and I'm just going to bring them alive now. one of the things that sticks out to me is we were talking about the heart and mind and how we need to be led by our hearts at this time. Kuyuk had talked about the people of the fire, the people of the heart are going to be the ones who help midwife us into the next phase. And that's us. We are the fire. We are the fire. We carry the fire and we burn inside of the fire and we share the fire, right? And so in bringing our mind into our heart space, Julia says it's only the mind that says something is impossible, but the distance from the heart to the mind is not that far. When you have that mindset, it's like, okay, we can get there, right? It doesn't seem that insane when we can take that breath and remember that the distance isn't that far. It's just about making that choice. Kuyuk said, the wisdom of healing the world starts with ourselves. It starts right here, everybody. Let's model change, not fight for it. Let's model it. Ocean said, every life deserves precious, unconditional love. Yes, it does, including ourselves. And when you can hold that space, then you can be readily available for service. It's just like a child. When they see that someone is hurt or something that needs to be attended to, they step right in. And so in many ways, we want to kind of step into that childlike wonder so that we can create and build that resilience and create that container that we need to create the kind of future that we want to live into. So kind of holding that piece and inviting you into that space. The last thing I'm going to do before I introduce the moderator is I'm going to play you just a little tune because it helps me to play music. And this is a gift from all of you and to all of you, just so I can ground us into the space. So thank you for your heart. Thank you for your ears. Thank you for your minds. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your creativity. This is dedicated to all of you out there as we recover the memory of our future. May this melody send heart and love out into wherever we are at this time, as long as we're here right now. Okay, beautiful beloveds, we have a wonderful program for you today. And we're going to start with a conversation all about impossible journeys and moving from crisis to opportunity. It's exactly what we need to be thinking, feeling, talking about today. I am very excited to introduce one of my favorite people on the planet who will be moderating this panel today. And not only has he been a longtime publishing professional with a career that kind of spans 3 decades, he's worked at the Free Press and also Doubleday, HarperCollins, and St. Martin's. There's so many beautiful things about this human being that I love, and his name is Adam Bello. I'll be able to tell you more about him, but one of the things that I love is that he stepped into my life at a really important moment in my life to hold me up and to really help me see my full self so that I could step fully into my world service. And I love him with all my heart. He is my partner in life and someone that I admire and feel very blessed to be able to be with. So I'm very excited to invite Adam into this space of the Impossible Summit. And honey, come on up here. Okay. Well, it might be taking them a second.
Here I come.
Here you are. There you are.
are.
You're here with me doing this.
Good morning.
Good morning. And I really look forward to this conversation. Thank you so much for all that you do for me and for us, and have a wonderful panel, sweetheart.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say hello to everybody and welcome to this morning's Impossible Talk, entitled Impossible Journeys from Crisis to Opportunity. I want to thank my lovely co-host, T-Bird, as well as our dauntless tech team who are keeping things running behind the scenes. My name, as T-Bird said, is Adam Bello, and I am a book editor based in New York City. So please forgive the sound of sirens occasionally passing outside. It's just a day in the life here at the center of the COVID pandemic. I'm also a co-founder of the New World Network, which is sponsoring this amazing event. I hope you're enjoying it so far. We have much more in store for you throughout the week, so please continue to tune in. Our panel today consists of 3 individuals who have all found unique ways as private citizens to tackle seemingly impossible problems. Our purpose today is to really get inside the motivations and experiences of these remarkable individuals who have decided to take on impossible problems. We will try to reserve some time for Q&A, so please post your questions in the chat as our conversation progresses. I'll bring our panelists on one at a time, starting with Georgette Bennett. Georgette, please join us.
Morning, Adam, and thank you, Tonya, for that lovely melody to set the mood.
Isn't that beautiful? Georgette, I'm going to say a few flattering things about you, so please indulge me while I introduce you to our audience. Georgette is the founder of the Tannenbaum Center for Interreligious Understanding and the Multi-Faith Alliance for Syrian Refugees. She has a long career as a social scientist, a journalist, an author, and a philanthropist. She's also the author of an upcoming book about her experiences, so far untitled, which I am publishing next year, I'm very happy to say. We'll talk to Georgette about the reasons that made her feel that she had to do something personally to alleviate the suffering of refugees from the Syrian civil war, and how humanitarian diplomacy can bring former enemies together. I'd next like to invite up Maya Persaud, if Maya is technically connected. She can join us now, and I will introduce her briefly. She's a remarkable person. Maya is a former model and entrepreneur. She has a master's degree in social anthropology, and she's worked for the NGOs Planet Finance and La CIMAD. Maya came to our attention because she is the co-founder of Espero, a nonprofit based, I believe, in Paris, that trains refugees in beekeeping, many of them Syrians and North African refugees as well. So Maya and Georgette have something in common, and I hope we'll get into some of their common experiences with working with Syrian refugees. What's really beautiful about Maya's program is that it addresses 2 problems at the same time: the decline of bee populations due to climate change, and the need for refugees to find a way to integrate themselves into French society through agricultural employment. We'll talk to her about the inspiration for her work and some of the challenges that she's faced. Maya will also be presenting her project later today at 2:20 Eastern Standard Time, so please be sure to check that out. I don't know that she's been able to join us technically, but she will, I'm sure, be here shortly. Our third panelist, who I'll introduce as well and is invited to come onto stage, is Yotam Polizer. Yotam is the global CEO of IsraAid, a remarkable humanitarian enterprise that offers aid and disaster relief at multiple sites all over the world. In addressing all kinds of crises, he and his team have learned much about how to find opportunity in the face of near total collapse of social and economic structures. Later today at 4:30, some of his colleagues will present a webinar on dealing with impossible stress, applying some of the lessons derived from disaster relief to the problems of daily life especially during this period. We are all subject to unprecedented stress due to the COVID crisis. I hope you'll check it out. Yotam is also one of my authors, and his book, like Georgette's, will be published next year. Let's see.
Hi, Adam. It's good to be here.
Hi, Yotam. Thanks for joining us from Israel. Georgette is also here in New York. I'm being told that I need to refresh in order to bring Maya onto my screen. Is that still, excuse me for talking to my tech team while we're doing this. Okay. All right, so we have a problem connecting Maya by video, but she is here. Okay. Which one of us is to refresh? Is it me or Maya?
You've disappeared, Adam.
I have. Okay, I'm going to refresh my screen. This will take a second.
Hello, Yotam.
Hey, Georgette. How are you?
Good, and nice to meet you, Maya.
Hi, how are you?
There you
Oh,
are.
Maya.
There you are.
Sorry, nice to meet you too. So should I introduce myself, or I don't know?
You've been introduced.
Oh,
You've
I
been
got
introduced.
Okay, so should I just talk about my project?
I think we have to wait for Adam. To come back.
Okay, great. Nice to meet you guys. Where are you located? Where are you?
New York.
I'm in Tel Aviv, in Israel, and
Okay.
yeah.
Shalom.
Shalom, Maya.
Shalom. I'm in Paris.
I'm back.
Okay,
Paris,
Great.
France. Yeah.
very global.
Can anybody hear
Yeah.
me?
Hi,
Yeah.
Adam.
Hi. Okay, good. All right, great. I'm on the edge of my seat. This is so exciting. A little too much for my temperament.
Not your temperament, maybe your computer, but not your temperament.
The computer's overheating from all the positive energy that's been running through it.
Yay!
We've just lost your image again, but your voice is loud and clear.
I can see myself. Can you not see me?
No.
No, we lost you for a second.
I'm sorry, guys. While I'm refreshing, let me cue Maya up with a question.
Okay.
To begin with her. As I said in the beginning of my introduction, I really want to get at what it is that motivated you as a private person to get involved in, trying to alleviate a massive global problem within the scope of what is possible for you. You've written movingly about this experience, about when you could you tell us that story? I think people would love to hear it.
Oh yeah. So when my son was 3 months old, he was hospitalized for a month, and this was in 2013. We were in the pediatric ward, and that's when I really learned about the refugee crisis. Because a nurse was telling me that I heard a lot of babies crying, and I was like, oh my God, what can I do? I'm sleeping here with my baby and I hear all these babies crying. Why isn't no one coming to see them? And the nurse told me that a lot of Libyan mothers were leaving their babies in the hospital because that's the only place they could be safe. So I started doing research about the refugee crisis, and that's when it really started in Syria. So I said, look, I live in Paris, the crisis is here, so what can I do? And so I called my former boss, who was who's the president of Planet Finance, and I'd read an article that he had written on the refugee crisis. So I called him. I was like, look, what can I do? I want to get involved. I was getting involved like kind of spontaneously by helping feed, like, I mean, there were like squats in Paris. So I was going around helping like feed, give out meals and stuff like that. But I wanted to be involved in a more concrete way and a more sustainable way for refugees in particular, because I had through meeting other organizations I had learned about the difficulties of them being integrated into society because of the barrier of the language. So I wanted to do something with the social aspect and environmental aspect. So I said, if there's this barrier of the language, what can we do to surpass that barrier and help them get jobs? So naturally, the environmental sector, like agriculture, sustainable agriculture, we said, why not train refugees in that and help them get jobs? In that case, they don't have to master the language initially, and then while they're working, give them, help them with language lessons and things like that, and to provide additional training so that they can learn more about the sector and to evolve in their jobs. So we just started. I said, look, let's find some land and start a project on training refugees in agriculture. Something we wanted to start with permaculture, and in Paris it was difficult to find a big piece of land. So we found a small plot of land. It was 200 square meters, and we said, okay, let's put some beehives here and let's start a beehive project. We found a Syrian refugee who had 30 years of experience in beekeeping, and he agreed to volunteer in the project and to train asylum seekers and refugees in that sector. So it started really as an organic, or I really started organically, and then it grew into a integration, professional integration project, because we just started with beekeeping, and it was more of a more social integration, and because not everybody's going to be a beekeeper, but it was a way to capture people into, especially who are isolated. One of the asylum seekers, he was homeless, living on the streets, and despite that, he came to every class because he wanted to become a beekeeper and learn a trade so he can be something. That's what he said, and take that trade with him anywhere he would have to go if he weren't able to stay in France. So now we train, and we have a big national project where we integrate them directly into a job in the agricultural sector in the vineyards in the south of France, and in maraîchage, agriculture, like tomatoes and I don't know. I learned all of this language in French because it's a totally new field. So I don't know how to say, like organic agriculture. And then we train them while they're working, so that they can get better, like to améliorer, to learn French, and to and we teach them, like we're helping them get like driver's licenses and things like that, so that they can evolve in their field.
Beautiful, wonderful story. And how long has this been going on?
So we started in May 2017, and now we have about 130 refugees that we follow, that we're integrating into the job market.
We're going to come back to this to your story, and I'll ask you a few more questions about it. But I'd like to bring Georgette on, and ask her to tell us a little bit about Georgette, a little about your background in humanitarian aid, and specifically how you decided what motivated you to get involved in this refugee crisis.
So I think that I was initially, I think somebody's got an open mic with a lot of background noise.
Yeah, there's somebody else.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll close my microphone. I'll close mine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I was initially inspired to do this work by my late husband, Rabbi Mark Tannenbaum, who was a pioneer in the whole field of interreligious relations and bridge building. But he also had a very, very deep commitment to refugees. And that was expressed, I think, primarily through his long time service on the board of the International Rescue Committee. When he died, because he had such a deep commitment to IRC, I took his place on the board. That was in 1992. In January 2013, the IRC published a report on the Syrian crisis, and being a typical overextended New Yorker, that report, I'm ashamed to say, sat on my desk for about 3 months before I had a chance to read it. But once I read it, I was absolutely stunned by the magnitude of this crisis. And yet it was getting so little attention in the world. Now, as I read that report, I think one of the reasons that it hit me so hard is because A, I'm a child of the Holocaust, and what I was reading reminded me very much of the Holocaust. B, I'm a refugee myself. And so I resonate deeply with this experience of having lost one's roots and having to find a way to fit in to a world that you've not been part of. But I think most important was that it hit me as a Jew, because as a Jew, I am commanded, Leviticus 19:16 was just kept reverberating through my brain, thou shalt not stand by idly while the blood of your neighbor cries out from the earth. So as a Jew, I am commanded to take action in the face of human suffering. And another absolutely fundamental precept of Judaism is the concept of tikkun olam, repairing the world, that every Jew has an obligation to repair the world. It really kind of gets to it. One of the great misunderstandings of Judaism, the notion of Jews as a chosen people. It's not that Jews are chosen for special privilege. They're not, but chosen for special responsibility. And that's what Tikkun Olam is all about. And so I felt I had to take action. I had to do something. And Adam, I don't know if you want me to get into the something here or whether you want to save that for a later part of the conversation. But this explains my motivation. That's what got me involved with the Syrian crisis.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll come back to details of what you've been doing. I want to really get at the whole concept of humanitarian diplomacy and the way in which it brought people together from across lines of conflict, because that's a very important part of your experience. I want to turn to you, Tom. It seemed to me it was born a humanitarian activist. It was a remarkable story just unfolded in a conversation we had about his book, and I just would love to talk to Tom about your first experience.
Hey, thank you, Adam. So again, I've a little bit about my background. I'm from Israel. I was born in a very small village in the north part of Israel. I never thought that I will get involved in any kind of humanitarian crisis. And actually, it all started for me after my military service when I went to Nepal. And I was interested in trekking. I wanted to trek in the Himalaya. And then as I got off the mountain, I saw a small ad in Kathmandu, the capital, that invited backpackers to volunteer with street children in Nepal. And I thought that sounds cool. I'll do it for 2 weeks and I'll continue to Thailand or wherever I was going. These 2 weeks in Nepal turned into 3 years. of social project there. I learned Nepalese, which is a a very useful language. I didn't think it would be useful, but actually, when I went back to Nepal a few years later as part of Israel, after the earthquake, the language and the local culture understanding proved to be extremely useful. But actually, my work at Israel, which is the organization I'm leading right now, which is a non-governmental organization, non-political organization based out of Israel, but operating in 15 countries. My work started in Japan after the tsunami in 2011. And I think similar to all of us, I think you all remember these very surreal images of 120-foot wave of tsunami, cars, buildings, everything is kind of swept away. And I remember seeing these images on TV, and I said, first, that's not real. That's a really like high budget Hollywood movie. But second, that I want to do something. But what can I do in that scale of disaster? Funny enough, a couple of days later, a phone call came from the person who used to run Israel at that time, who offered me to lead a relief mission to Japan. So that's how it all started, and I found myself in Japan just a little bit after the tsunami. And again, I was supposed to be there for just 2 weeks of relief mission. And I remember when I went on the plane to Tokyo, it was empty because everyone was kind of running away from Japan because of the radiation from Fukushima. And again, these 2 weeks in Japan turned into 3 years. So that's kind of the story of my life. And then I learned Japanese and actually met my wife there, which is a whole different story. But then from Japan, we call it disaster dating. It's highly recommended. But and I could talk about that for hours. But after Japan, I had the opportunity to lead other relief missions to Nepal after the earthquake, to Sierra Leone during the Ebola crisis, to Lesbos, Greece, to support Syrian refugees, which is sort of where Georgette and I connected. So a lot of different missions, and in the last 3 years, I went back to Israel to help run Israel and an amazing team of people who respond to disasters and are incredibly active actually now with response to coronavirus.
Great story, and I'm looking forward to reading it in detail in your book. Let's go back to Maya for a second, and I kind of want to dig more deeply into how you personally were challenged in the process of engaging this issue. You have done anything like this before?
We hear you. It's a little bit fuzzy, but we hear you. I hear you. It's a little bit breaking up.
It looks like
Maya's still muted, I think.
Sorry, it's a little fuzzy, but it's choppy. It's a little choppy. Could you just repeat the question? Sorry.
Sure. Please tell me if there's still difficulty. I can do it, but it's important to know. I'm curious about the personal challenges that what came up for you in moving to this role. Was this something kind of thing you had done before? Was it was it personally challenging you? Was it demanding of your time? Take away time from your family? What was this as a person? What it's really just to understand what your experience was as you moved into this role.
Yeah, I always did volunteer work, like since I was 13 years old. We were always encouraged to volunteer and do things in the community. And it just seemed like a responsibility. If you're born with a little bit more, I have 2 parents who are amazing, who gave us so much love. I grew up in Hawaii. I had an amazing childhood. So I was always taught if you're given a little bit more, then you have a responsibility to do more and give back. So I always wanted, I'd worked for a few big NGOs and volunteered for organizations. But I really wanted to do something local and small because I had a bit of a critical, I don't know, I just wanted to do something local and small and where I saw the real impact and where I could be close to the people I work with and so the only issues were not being able to help as much as I want because we trained asylum seekers, and sometimes they disappear because they weren't able to, because they had their fingerprints taken in another country, so they were sent away, and losing that contact with them was really difficult because you kind of form a bond and then you just lose somebody and you don't know what happened to him. That was really, really difficult. Otherwise, just working with refugees is amazing because they have so much hope. They're so grateful, and they really want to. They're very hardworking. We've had zero problems, and we've been doing this for 3 years. And we even have volunteers that in the refugee population that come and help us, and they're so eager and motivated. And to see them to grow and to get sign their first contract, their first job contract is so rewarding. So
okay.
Yeah,
I can't. All right. I'm sorry. We're having a few technical problems.
Hey guys. Hello everybody out in the world. We're
Hey.
Hey, it's so beautiful to see you. So everybody, thank you for your patience. I'm learning how to be a tech guru because of this. So I'm just gonna have and go somewhere else so that we can continue this really beautiful, important conversation about turning crisis into opportunity, which is in terms of what's happening now. Always finding the opportunity. So excuse me for the interruption, and here we go.
Hey everybody, you're getting a tour. I guess I was part of what I'm curious about is this: when you're working with people who've been traumatized by their experiences, I imagine that this creates challenges for you. I would imagine that these are people who have all kinds of trauma-related issues. Have you had that kind of a challenge? If you're prepared to deal with it?
Well, not really. Right now we have we're working with an Egyptian beekeeper who's quite traumatized, but he has 20 years in beekeeping experience. And it's a challenge because we're helping him start a business. We financed some beehives for him, and we found him a plot of land. And at one point he was on the streets, he didn't have housing, and we helped him find housing, but he didn't want to take it. And sometimes they're just things that we just can't understand, and some people can't understand me, but I like challenges, so it's a little difficult because I think he's been traumatized. But it's a learning experience for us, and we're surrounded. In our team, we have people who've been working with refugees for years who have experience. So we have a really large ecosystem of partners to orient people who want help and who'll take help, but some of them don't take the help. So we try to do what we can, and for now it's working. So and just beekeeping, it's a very kind of calming experience when you're working around the beehives with all the bees, and it's kind of a meditating experience. And I think now that he has his beehives, he's a lot calmer and happier to start working with his babies again. So that's been probably the best therapy for him right now.
Yeah, I know that Yotam has found that in working in other areas, that apart from physical security, shelter, food, medical attention, that people also suffer extreme trauma, and that this has become very important for your work. Would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, it's again, unfortunately, when you think about disasters, again, whether it's a natural disasters or man-made disaster like the refugee crisis, or even a pandemic like what we're experiencing right now, people think about shelter, food, water, medical support. All of this is extremely important, but mental health, psychological support, trauma counseling is really, really neglected. And there's a lot of research about it. The trauma as a result of an event like that is on so many levels. First and foremost, it's people who lost their loved ones. And just thinking right now about COVID-19 and all the millions of people who actually lost their family members, who are experiencing terrible grief and loss. Then on top of that, you have the stress aspect, and obviously stress is a very big part of our life right now. I can share with you personally, when I was in the Ebola outbreak in Sierra Leone, I woke up every night for the first month full of sweat, which is one of the symptoms of the virus. At that point of time, it was about 50% survival rate of people who contracted the virus. So it was very, very scary and stressful, and I was anxious, and obviously the people who were living there, I was just coming to try to help, but people who experienced that regularly suffered a lot. And then obviously you have the trauma of the helpers, and what we call secondary trauma or vicarious trauma by psychologists, the trauma of people who come to help. And we've seen it a lot actually with the Syrian refugee crisis, because the magnitude of this crisis, you feel so helpless. You want to help these people, and you make a difference in people's lives, but the problem is so big, and it's so overwhelming, and it's so politicized, that you feel overwhelmed and you feel helpless, and as a result, you've seen a lot of trauma. So helping. I hear myself twice, so if you can mute yourself. Pretty terrible echo.
Okay.
Okay.
Please bring
Okay.
that in.
I think it's better.
I
Okay,
can't
cool.
see
Yeah.
Yotam or George's machine.
Okay.
I need the other computer back.
Should I continue, Adam, or should I?
We're both here.
I need the other machine back. I
Yeah,
don't
we're
see
here.
either here.
Okay, but we can see and hear you.
Okay, that's fine, but I'm having a technical problem.
Okay, I'll continue, Adam. All right, I'll continue, I think. So again, the mental health needs are overwhelming, and what we need to understand when it comes to mental health is it's very important to provide immediate support for people right after the trauma. We usually call it psychological first aid.
Which can
Let's have the questions too.
if I can hear them talking.
Okay, should I continue? Okay, I'll continue in the meantime. So no, it's a bit confusing, but we call it disaster management, right? It's all about crisis and opportunity. So this is another tech disaster, and we're coping with it. So psychological first aid is really the first kind of intervention that we're doing, but it's very important to provide long-term support. And that's why many of our projects actually are not just immediate relief, but we actually continue to provide support for 2, 3, and sometimes even 7 years. In Japan, after the tsunami, you ended up staying there for 7 years, providing mental health support. And it's always very important to understand the local culture, because if you're bringing, let's say, Western kind of psychology to Japan or to Syrian refugees or to Sierra Leone during the Ebola, it will probably not be so effective, and it actually could make more damage. So the local culture and context is so crucial and important. So for us, it's not just about giving support directly, it's more about finding good partners, providing them with tools and trainings, and then they actually provide the support for the local community, and it's much more sustainable because they're actually staying when we're leaving. So that's in short, in a nutshell. I don't know, maybe Georgette, do you want to share a little bit about your experience with it when it comes to trauma, because you've been dealing with that a lot in the Multi-Faith Alliance?
Well, we basically have been intermediaries in that process. So yes, certainly one of the forms of aid that we have promoted is trauma treatment, because a displaced person isn't able to move on with their lives until they've had trauma treatment. But Adam had asked me to focus on humanitarian diplomacy. So while he's getting his computer back up and running, I'm going to just talk about that particular challenge. So first of all, I approached this issue as a Jew, which in itself is a little bit counterintuitive, because certainly one of the questions that always came up is, why are you as a Jew so concerned about Syrians? Syrians hate Jews, Syrians hate Israel. So why do this for them? Well, I mentioned the scriptural reasons why I was motivated to do this. But I saw a real opportunity to build bridges between enemies in terms of this work. So my initial entry point, and the greatest challenge when you're dealing with a crisis of this magnitude, you're talking about more than half of a country's entire population displaced. You're talking about somewhere between 500,000 and 700,000 people murdered inside the country. You're talking about ongoing torture. You're talking about 80% of a population having sunk into poverty. You're talking about the life expectancy having dropped by 20 years. So when you're talking about a crisis of this magnitude, how do you find a niche where you as an individual can actually have some impact? And my niche was to, first of all, see whether we could get Israel to respond to this crisis proactively. There were already a number of Israeli NGOs operating below the radar, but at an official governmental level. And I thought maybe a way to do that would be to have Israelis work through the IRC. But when we heard back from the IRC staff on the ground in Jordan, they said, if we are in any way perceived as being in partnership with Israel, our lives are in danger. So there I was with egg all over my face. And I said, okay, now if this can't be an Israeli response, then let's make this a Jewish communal response, because I wasn't seeing a communal response to this issue. And then we mobilized through the Anti-Defamation League a Jewish communal response. And that then became a basis for a multi-faith response, because there's enormous power in bringing together the cross-section of religions and uniting them in one voice to serve as the conscience of the world. Not only that, but religious institutions, religious actors bring with them vast constituencies, tremendous convening power, sophisticated communication networks. And so what I ultimately did was I founded the Multi-Faith Alliance for Syrian Refugees, which is now made up of more than 100 organizations that are committed to alleviating the suffering of the Syrian people. And I'm very proud that IsraAid is one of our partner organizations. But now going back to the issue of humanitarian diplomacy, because this is really where it began for me. I saw an opportunity not only to alleviate terrible suffering, but to build bridges, as I said before, build bridges between enemies, namely Syrians and Israelis. And there came a point after we had been operating for a couple of years in which we actually were able to bring together Syrians and Israelis to address this crisis and to play a role in making this official policy of the Israeli government, something called Operation Good Neighbor. And through Operation Good Neighbor and the opening of the border on the Golan Heights, we were able to deliver massive amounts of humanitarian aid directly into southwest Syria, which you have to understand is an area that was entirely surrounded by the regime, except for one little pocket in a corner where there was Al-Qaeda. And the regime does not permit humanitarian aid to go into any area it does not control. So southwest Syria was very difficult to access, but it was very easy to access through Israel, through the Golan Heights. And the aid that we provided not only reached a population of 1.5 million people and penetrated deep into southwest Syria, even beyond Dara, but we were also able to support 3 medical facilities and a bakery that produced 15,000 pitas a day. Now, one of the interesting consequences of this, and this was written up by the Center for New American Security, this actually helped to stabilize an entire region. As you're probably aware, the way that most extremist groups manage to get a foothold, it's true for ISIS, it's true for Al-Qaeda, it's true for Hamas, it's true for Hezbollah. It's by providing services that the government is not providing. And so they get a foothold and they are able to dominate a region in that way. Extremists could not get a foothold in southwest Syria because we were supporting a modicum of some kind of economy. People were getting the services that they needed. We were working through the local councils, which supported the civil society structure. And so for as long as Operation Good Neighbor was going on, this was an area that was stable and relatively calm. The proof of the pudding in terms of the importance of humanitarian diplomacy is in what happened after an agreement was made between Russia, Iran, the regime, and Israel that they would be able to take over that area, come right back up to the Israeli border, but Israel would have to shut that border in terms of humanitarian operations. The deal with Russia, on which it did not deliver, was that it was going to make sure people got services in that area. It didn't do that. It was going to protect the people in that region from retaliation from the regime. It did not do that. The area immediately collapsed into chaos, assassinations, infighting, no services, no economy. And that, I think, is the proof of the power of humanitarian diplomacy. Now, this didn't stop MFA from doing its work. We immediately started doing the same thing in the north and northwest of Syria. But I'll stop there.
Thank you. It's a very powerful story. As you know, I'm a big fan of your work and of your writing. And I think in particular, it's just amazing to see how, you know, an individual person can choose to involve themselves in a massive, impossible, insoluble problem, and achieve something much greater by leveraging relationships and turning a series of crises into a series of opportunities. It's very inspiring, and that's what we're trying to convey to our viewers. Yotam, I think what I wanted to shift to is your what you've learned about the opportunities that arise when during a crisis, that when old existing structures collapse or prove to be inadequate, that it can often create an opportunity for innovation, for improvement. So it's a silver lining kind of story. Could you give an example of this kind of thing, this discovery?
Sure. I have countless examples. I mean, I think for us, the way we frame it is the concept of post-traumatic growth, PTG. And the way I like to kind of explain it is like, if this is when things are normal, this is like the surface level, right? And then when there is a crisis, things are down at the bottom. So our goal is not just to bounce back and bring things back to normal. Our goal is to build back better, and use crisis as an opportunity. And I have a lot of personal experiences with that, but a lot of organizationals too. So on a personal level, you know, I briefly share that, you know, the tsunami in Japan was an opportunity for me to meet the love of my life, who now lives with me in Israel, and she's what we call a Japanese. But on the organizational level, it's very interesting because in each of the crises where we operated, we saw that was the opportunity for people to understand, to build better systems. And you know, I remember in the Ebola crisis, it was an opportunity to rebuild a health system that actually didn't really exist so much before the Ebola crisis. In the story of the Syrian refugees, it's very similar to what Georgette experienced. It was an amazing opportunity to build bridges between enemies and between people who never had a chance to meet or to interact through this crisis. Now we have an amazing story of refugees actually in multiple countries, in Greece and in Germany and in other places, that are now producing masks, amazing masks, by the way, not just the cheap ones, like a really high level and beautifully designed masks, not just for themselves or for the refugee population, but actually for the general population. So in fact, I just heard from our team in Berlin, in Germany, you know, where there's about 1.1 million refugees arrived in the last few years. That the refugees, we have a leadership group there of young refugees, and they initiated this mask production, and they produces many masks, and they started distributing it to the elderly and to many Holocaust survivors. So think about it. It's an Israeli organization. We have staff and team members that are refugees from Syria, from Iraq, from Iran, from countries that never, you know, had any kind of relation with any Jewish person or any Israeli person, and now they produce masks in Germany, of all places, 75 years after the Holocaust or so, and giving it to Holocaust survivors. So that's, I think, a beautiful example of this post-traumatic growth, how crisis could turn into an opportunity, into a bridge building, but also in terms of the refugees empowerment story. And it's very important to understand we're not wishing for disasters or for crises or for traumas. Unfortunately, they happen, and they happen all the time in different forms and shapes to all of us, and even more so to vulnerable communities like refugees. So how to facilitate a process that takes this crisis, turn it into a growth, turn it into an opportunity, is really the essence of what we're trying to do at ISRAID.
Maya, I'd like to turn back to you. I just want to note that I don't have a visual for you. I'm just confirming that you can hear me and that you can see everybody else.
We hear you fine now. Yeah.
Okay.
I can see you also. Nice to have you back.
Thanks. I'm a shy person by nature. Maya, I would love to hear a little more from you about how you feel your path is developing. This is something this is a project you obviously felt very, personally, you took personal ownership of. You devoted a lot of time to it. Where do you see your project going and your work taking you in the future?
Good question. So yeah, I've been a volunteer on this project for 3 years, and it's very fulfilling. And there are many opportunities. The agricultural sector in France was. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I'm muted.
No? Okay. Can you? Yeah.
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Adam just said he couldn't.
You're fine.
Okay. So. Yeah, the agricultural sector in France was really suffering, and because of the COVID, the borders were closed, so all of the migrant workers weren't able to come into France. So the Polish and the Spanish and the Moroccans, they weren't able to come. So the farmers were really, really suffering. They had no other options. And a new partner of ours, it's an organization that socially integrates people through had a large network of farmers, and they said, why not help these Afghans and Sudanese and Iraqi refugees and other
I have no idea how to
chronically unemployed people find jobs in the agricultural sector. We have a large kind of a pool of potential workers who are searching for jobs who don't necessarily.
Excuse me for interrupting if Maya is still speaking, but I don't have video or audio for the moment, so I can't. What you're saying.
Hello, everyone. There seem to be issues in New York City, so that's why Adam and Tanya are having a hard time hearing the panelists.
And figuring this
so
all
bear with
out.
us
We're going to pull up our tech team for a second.
while we
so
figure out how
thank you
to
everybody for
make
your
sure they can
patience.
communicate via the chat.
Can you hear me now? Is it okay now?
Tom, George, are you able to hear Maya?
Yes.
Yeah, we hear you, Maya, all the time.
Well, I'm
We
glad.
never lost you.
I hate Maya. But it's defeating my desire to have a conversation with you. And I'm in the awkward position of being the host of this discussion. So it's really kind of messing up my mojo.
Should
Don't
self-moderate, Adam?
Yes, that would be great. Why don't Georgia? Why don't you moderate?
Okay.
We're dealing with the impossible here, and we're improvising.
Yeah, improvise.
Right.
I like it.
All right.
Let me just add one
So
thing
should I-
before I hand over the mic. It's we have about 20 minutes left in our program, and I want to encourage people to post questions for our panelists in the chat so that we can reserve some time for Q&A. If there are questions, please don't hesitate to post them. Thank you.
Okay.
So Maya, you were in the middle of responding to Adam's question about what do you see for yourself in the future and for the future of this project. And that's probably a good way for all of us to wrap up the session. So Maya, why don't you go ahead and finish?
So I'd like to continue on the project because now we're on a national level, and the goal is really to help farmers who no longer have their employees that usually come from Spain and Poland to work. So to help the people we're working with find jobs in these sectors who really want to do this work, who worked on farms in their countries and just didn't have access to these type of jobs, to really create that link, and also to help develop a sustainable economic model for a lot of these farms who aren't able to survive because of various reasons. So because this crisis led to this opportunity for me to start working in with the agricultural sector, which never would have come to my mind before, to try to help work on the economic models through creating. We already started in Paris with team building workshops with large companies like Sodexo and large insurance companies, to have them come in, and we do workshops around beekeeping, and so that's another source of income, and for the farms, and for the people that are working on our team, and the refugees that are working with us. So to create more a sustainable economic model around beekeeping and permaculture, and help generate funds that are that are from the non-traditional sectors, I guess, or through big corporations doing workshops and things like that. That's the next level I want to take it to, not just association. I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I don't like depending on government funds, so I want to create something more dynamic and self-sustaining. And we're in Paris, so I mean, we're going to sell our honey to the Ritz or the Ritz Hotel, and try to create a more sustainable economic model through various things.
So Adam, are you back?
I'm here.
Ready to reclaim the moderator's chair?
I still can't see or hear Maya, I'm sorry to say.
Maya has just wrapped up.
Okay. Okay, so do we have any questions?
Yep. We're going to take some questions, everybody.
Okay.
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 So I think that's it so far. So a question from Jeff. What do you think about expanding? This is who this is for, but let's just throw it out. What do you think about expanding your ideas by franchising your efforts to eliminate barriers and increase the adoption on a global scale? This is the premise of the online community called the Ultimate Collaboration. I'm not familiar with that online community, but I guess the question, so I'm not sure, I'm happy for Maya to address the question. Yotam is already operating globally, but he might have some thoughts about that. But why don't we why don't we start with Yotam and
Sure.
around the horn.
So I think the question of scalability is very tricky, and I know, I'm sure Georgette and Maya will agree, because we have to deliver quality services, and we have, I mean, just look at the current crisis. The scale is so overwhelming. Where do you even start from? Should we focus back home, or go to the refugee camps, or work in the global south? So I think it's a huge question, and I think all of us agree that we need to find a niche and to focus. Yes, we are operating globally, but it's not. If you ask me what's my vision for the organization, it's not about being in 100 countries. Or reaching 100 million people. We're now reaching almost 2 million people a year, which is a lot. But I think what we are focusing on in our vision is becoming more professionalized, is having very clear models of support. And I spoke briefly before about mental health, which is one of our key areas. We also focus a lot about water and sanitation, which is another area that's really neglected in the humanitarian space. So I think the key for us is to find really strong partners who could take the tools that we're bringing, and they could scale it then, because we always, there's a kind of, in the humanitarian sphere, there's a language with a lot of acronyms that we always use. One of the most used acronym is TOT, training of trainers, which is, basically the understanding that you don't want to give people fish, you want to teach them how to fish, and in a better scenario, you actually want to teach them how they can build their own fish pond. I think Maya's project and also a lot of what the Multi-Faith Alliance are doing is actually that, is empowering the local people and giving them the tools and the skills to lead this support. And that's what we are always aiming for in our project. And it could only be done if you work in depth, if you work long term, if you don't think about disaster relief as a short term effort. There's another thing that I cynically call the Aid Festival. The Aid Festival is what happens usually right after a crisis, when CNN are there, and it's everywhere on the press and social media, and everybody's sending donations and supplies and volunteers and you name it. And usually after a week, in a big disaster, maybe after a month or 2 months, 90% of the aid is gone. And then the local population, who was originally traumatized by a terrible crisis, are abandoned and re-traumatized. And we actually heard from a lot of our beneficiaries that the second trauma, this feeling that that you become the center of attention and then you're abandoned by the world, is actually worse than the first one for many of these people. So the key thing for us, it's not rocket science, it's just to stay, to work side by side with the community, to understand that when you enter a project like that, it's a long-term commitment. And just, giving the example of COVID-19 right now, as we're seeing, I see, as we're seeing the curve flattens in the US or in Europe or in Israel, our concern is that the people who suffer the most and continue to suffer from the side effects, whether it's economic or domestic violence or grief from losing your loved ones, will be just left alone. So this long-term commitment to long-term recovery is just super, super crucial, and it's more important than just scaling up and reaching millions of people. It's more important the depth of the work you're actually doing. So actually, very inspired by both Maya and Georgette, that I've known for a few years, about not just their commitment, but also their focus on a very specific cause, on a very specific community.
I'm going to ask Maya a question, although I won't be able to see or hear her answer. But it has occurred to me as you're talking that the distinctive nature of Maya's project is that it's very focused on individuals working very closely over a long period of time with a small group of people, and that's obviously what we would all want to be able to do, in terms of making a difference and an impact in the lives of individuals. Tom and Georgette are operating at higher levels of institutional effort in global international efforts involving lots of NGOs and state actors and so forth. But when you come to the question of scalability, the question of whether a project like Maya's can be expanded without duplicating Maya herself, is I think is of interest to people. So I'd like, if not me, I'd like other people to hear what Maya thinks about how her project could be expanded or extended beyond the scope of what she and her team of people are able to achieve and accomplish in the lives of the individuals that they work with.
Yeah, I totally agree. When I started, I said I want to do something local. It's very important for me to be close to the project, to feel it, to see it, to be in constant interaction with the people, with the refugees I'm working with, and that's the most fulfilling part of it for me. But also, I wanted to know that my project would have a real impact, and I had to see it. And our vocation is to stay local. I'm not leaving Ile-de-France, Paris area. But and in the beginning of the project, we got calls from different people because we had some press, and we had people write us from Mexico and from different countries, and they were saying, how can we reproduce your project? And I was just saying, I can't tell you that. I could tell you what we do, but the context is always local, and you have to find a good team and do a project that's specific to your area, especially when it comes to permaculture, beekeeping. So now we've created partnerships with our first partnership with in the South, with the project that's already in the Southwest that started this integration of refugees in agriculture in the Southwest because of the COVID, because foreign workers couldn't come in. And it's expanding. So we said, okay, we'll help them in what we know, which is training in these areas. So we have an engineer that can actually go to the South, talk to the vineyards, the people who work at the vineyards, the farmers that work at the vineyards, and create a program to train them so that they can be in a few days, so that they can be operational, and also to help them while they're working to learn how to ride a tractor or things like that, so that they can evolve in their field. So we work with other local teams, but we have no vocation to expand on a national level without partners. So right now we have a strong partner in the Southwest, and we're going to go from there and see how it goes.
Adam, if I could just jump in and make a comment. Maya has just finished. I know you can't hear her, so I just wanted to let you know she just finished.
Thank you very much. Someone is texting me to tell me what she's been saying.
So
Please.
I think both Maya and Yotam made a very important point about working with partners. And I think we're all dependent on working with very good partners on the ground. But I think it's important to understand we're all people of goodwill. We all have good intentions. But doing good takes place in a geopolitical context. And that always impacts our ability to do the work. Even in Maya's case, where she is working on a very local level with individuals, her work is impacted by geopolitical factors. For example, borders are closed now. That's one of the reasons that the workers can't come in. We have borders closed all over the West.
Right.
And so if borders are closed, that means you can't resettle refugees. So you need to do strategic pivots in terms of what can you do for people in place? What kind of aid and what kind of services can you provide in place? Because we need to understand that the average conflicts these days last for 37 years. The average period of displacement is 17 years. And one of the reasons that borders are closed is that the thing that everybody is afraid of, especially with, this rightward tilt in governments all over the West, including in the US, is fear of radicalization and terrorism. But what we need to understand is that if we don't rescue people, if we don't help them where they are when we're not resettling them, we are in fact creating the conditions for what we fear the most. Because people who are left in limbo for years and for decades are very vulnerable to radicalization. So it is in the interest of all of us to focus on these people and to give them a life.
Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you. That's a very powerful statement. Thank you, Georgette.
Can I just relate? I see a couple of really interesting comments on the chat. So Mila wrote, act locally, connect, collaborate regionally, and learn and share globally, which I think is beautiful and really reflect the work that all of us are trying to do. And then Jeff wrote, franchising would be to pool resources to create a type of template to prevent local communities from having to start from scratch. And he explains that basically the idea is how can you replicate a good model and how can you not just repeat the same mistakes? And I'll be honest and tell you that I think in the humanitarian aid sphere that I've been for the last almost 13 years now, I've seen so many organizations and initiatives that are just and starting everything from scratch and not sharing information and not learning from each other. And I think it's a huge problem, and I think it's a very good point. So I'm really happy for this kind of forum, and I think we definitely need much more forums where we can actually share best practices, case studies, and collaborate. And if all these efforts will combine, and I know that with Georgette at least we've been for a number of years now looking into different possibilities of how to combine the efforts of the Multi-Faith Alliance and Israel and other organizations that are acting and supporting refugees. And that will all, that will create the notion of the whole is bigger. It's bigger than a part. And I think that's what it's all about at the end of the day. I also want to relate to Georgette's comment about our responsibility towards the most vulnerable. We haven't touched upon it in this session so much, but this is something that we have been talking about, especially now, especially when we're all feeling a big crisis at home or in the Western part of the world. I couldn't agree more with what Georgette just said. I think we really have to remember that there's people behind all these, geopolitical conflict or this crisis, and we're really, really concerned at Israel. And we just had a session with IRC, who is a much bigger organization, and Georgette was involved there. We're really concerned that the most vulnerable people will be left behind as we're all trying to face this pandemic, and the global consequences will be terrible for all of us.
Well, that's a very sobering note to end on, but I think we do have to end to wrap up. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to join us today. I apologize sincerely for our technical difficulties.
Now we hear and see you fine. We can continue.
So I would like to suggest, by the way, to all the panelists that they post a link to their your websites in the chat. so that anyone listening who wants to become involved, to support your work in whatever way that is appropriate, can reach out to you directly. This is a big part of our purpose in staging this event, just to bring together people like yourselves who are doing important work that we admire with supporters and the general public who might not otherwise hear about it or have a chance to contribute in whatever way seems appropriate. So that's important, and we hope that will happen. And with my thanks, we'll sign off. I just want to remind everybody that we have Maya will be presenting her project in greater detail this afternoon at about 2:20 Eastern Standard. And at 4:30, Yotam's colleagues will share a webinar under the title Impossible Stress. And as our listeners can tell, people who work at Yotam in disaster relief and humanitarian aid have had a lot to cope with. I've learned a lot of very valuable things that we're happy to share with you. So thank you, everybody. Thank you to our tech team, who I know have been under a little stress themselves, and maybe we should all take the stress workshop. And I think I will too.
You're all welcome to join.
Sure. Yeah.
And thank you, Adam. And thank you,
Adam.
Tanya.
Thank you.
Thank you, Georgette. Thank you, Maya.
Thank you.
Tanya.
Nice meeting you. Thank
You guys,
you.
I just have to say, with all my heart, I'm so glad that you're on this planet. I just feel so moved by your hearts and your courage and your light and everything that you've shared about not forgetting about others, and that we're all connected, and bridge making is so near and dear to my heart. And I just feel very honored that you're here with us and that you can share that message at this time. I think it really has landed in everyone who's here in our hearts, and that we needed to hear that. Just a reminder, because it's easy to get caught up in our own world, but to remember that the world is us. So thank you so much, and wishing you just a beautiful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you
for
very much.
bringing us together. Namaste.
Bye, everybody. Bye, audience. Thank you
Nice
for
meeting you.
watching.
So nice meeting you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.